And Mark is here to share with us strategies for managing anxiety and stress with kidney disease.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Thank you for coming.
You bet. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And it's great to be here. So are my slides up?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. You'd think after all this at-home COVID stuff, I'd be better at Zoom, but I'm learning still. So, well, it's great to be here, and thanks for the introduction, and thank you to RSN for inviting me to participate in this. And what we're going to try to cover here, I'm going to keep track of my time. Strategies for managing anxiety and stress with kidney disease. We're going to try to cover in 45 minutes that which I wish I had about 3 weeks to sit with all of you and spend time working with you on, because anxiety and stress are complicated issues that impact you in many different ways. And so I'm glad RSN continues to highlight the mental health components and the stress and depression and anxiety and, all the related issues with life with kidney disease. So just to give you a little bit more background on who I am, as Sharon mentioned, I've been a clinical social worker for 27 years. I run an organization here in Minneapolis called the Face It Foundation. And I've taught for a number of years in the School of Medicine and School of Social Work on anxiety and mood disorders. But probably what I bring to all of the work I do is my own experiences as a patient. I was hospitalized back in 2002 following my own significant bouts of depression and anxiety. So I've lived with these conditions, and I understand these things firsthand from the standpoint of how they impact us. And they are profound issues. And sometimes in the dialysis world or in the kidney disease world, our nephrologists, they don't always necessarily pay close attention to these issues. And they're very prominent and very prevalent and very impactful. So Chair mentioned, I run an organization called Face It. And what we do is we provide peer support services, much like RSN, for men who deal with depression and anxiety and trauma and addiction and suicide attempt survivors. And we serve over a couple hundred men. We do peer support groups. We do activities, education classes, retreats, mentors. I met Lori Hartwell a number of years ago, and Lori and RSN inspired many of the things I do with Face It and the peer model and the importance of peer support and the importance of having people who really truly understand what life each and every day with, in your case, kidney disease, or in our case here, mental health issues. It's critical to have these folks in your life. So what I want to do is just dive in real quick, and we're going to talk about a lot of different things. And I know that this is being recorded, and so I'm hopeful you'll be able to come back and go through some of the slides and the things that we're talking about, because there's a lot of information here. But I want to give you some tools. I want to give you some thoughts. I want to give you some ideas about ways to manage your stress, to manage your anxiety. And before I start, I just want to, make the differentiation between stress and anxiety. Both are emotional responses, no question. But, we think about stress generally being caused more by an external trigger, life with kidney disease, or deadlines at work, or tests looming, or, car insurance coming due, that I think more of when I talk about stress. And of course, stress comes with its own mental and physical symptoms, and stress is very real. But when we start to talk about anxiety, that's a different thing in of itself. And anxiety, much like any other mental health condition, is something that causes lots of problems and causes lots of challenges for folks. And when you think about anxiety versus stress, anxiety is persistent and it's excessive. And these are things that don't often go away, even when that stressor we identified earlier goes away. Eventually you pay the car insurance, you take the test, you get your access reworked. I mean, those stressful events usually pass. But then anxiety, what that likes to do is hang around, and anxiety continues to be problematic. And it is, one of the greatest challenges with chronic disease and depression and anxiety is just the high prevalence rate of it. And, there's a lot of data out there that suggests from a diagnosable or a clinically elevated state of anxiety, having diabetes, having hypertension, certainly having kidney disease, increases your risk for significant and serious clinical anxiety. As you can see here, anxiety disorders, it's actually the most prevalent mental health condition in the United States. And we don't hear a lot about anxiety, but anxiety is something that it says 18% here, but I would say anecdotally, in 30 years of being a clinician, anxiety is probably even more prevalent than that. And when you start to, really stratify and look at people with kidney disease, the numbers, depression, the data says rates of depression in people with kidney disease on dialysis is probably pushing between 40 and 45%. And so you would think statistically the rates of depression are even higher than that, since depression is more, anxiety is more prevalent than depression. So this is a real thing. And for those of you who know what anxiety is or have ever been diagnosed with anxiety, that persistent, excessive, unabating worry about the future and these fears and the insidious nature of, anxiety at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it wakes us from wakes us from a dark sleep with a cold sweat, fearing things that we believe for certain are going to happen, very catastrophic things. And so the debilitating nature of anxiety is real. So what are the types of anxiety disorders? Well, there's generalized anxiety disorder. And as the title of the diagnosis says, you're just anxious about everything. And there's no real rhyme or reason for it. You can use your rational brain to say, well, that's probably not going to happen and that's not going to happen. But yet this anxiety is so profound, and it can be far ranging. It can be, the likelihood of the things you're feeling anxious about, the likelihood of them ever occurring are often very, very small. But yet this anxiety really does dominate our thought process. Social anxiety, fears of being with other people, fears of going out, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, panic attacks. I was a hospital social worker back in the early 90s when I first got out of grad school, and I was a marathoner and I was a runner, and I worked at a small community hospital where I had a couple of panic attacks. And, at 26 years of age back then, I was in very good physical shape, and I got worked up for having a heart attack. I wasn't having a heart attack. I was having a panic attack, and it came out of nowhere. And it was the, shortness of breath, the rapid breathing, the chest pains, the sweating, and a full-on panic attack. And they are very real, and they are very debilitating. Post-traumatic stress, we certainly, when you think about life with kidney disease and you think about trauma and you think about the things that you've been through, whether that's a transplant, whether that's, going to dialysis, whether it's the simple diagnosis, not simple, it's the diagnosis of kidney disease. These are traumatic things. And, it is very well established the role trauma plays in contributing to all sorts of mental health concerns. So you, by nature, by the fact that you're living with a chronic condition, you have traumatic things that have occurred to you. So it's really critical to understand that these things are prevalent, they're prominent, and there are things we can do about it. And I'm not going to get into talking about medication or psychotherapy in this talk, but those are other things that certainly can be pursued. What I want to talk about are the things you can do. And I want to do my best to try to give you some skills in our short time here together that you can use. And I'm a good walking example, along with the hundreds of men we've worked with here at Face It, that we really can do things to help manage and mitigate the impact of our anxiety. But something you're going to hear me say a lot is it takes work and it takes a lot of preparation. The last time you want to try to, or the worst time to try to implement a new skill is in the middle of a panic attack. We have to have these skills in place. We have to have practiced them before the anxiety steps in. So let me just, real quick here again, contrast these two issues. Stress tends to be short term. Anxiety lingers. Stress tends to have a threat, tends to have a thing, whereas anxiety, there's no apparent danger. You think about the fight or flight. You've heard that before. Anxiety is when you are stuck in flight. Your self-regulating flight mechanism is stuck on. And in this mode is this restlessness, tenseness, nervousness. The really painful one there is the feeling of unease or dread. It's a horrible way to have to try to live. Kind of looks like this. This is how I see anxiety. It's just everything coming at us. We can't stop it. It swirls around us. It's everywhere. It's just this overwhelming sense that everything is bad. Everything is going to turn out bad, and there's just not a thing I can do about it. That's what anxiety does to us. And, what I want to talk about now is, what do we do about it? How do we cope with this thing? And as I mentioned earlier, certainly therapy, certainly medication can play a role in all of this. But for now, let's talk about what can you do? Let's talk about some unhealthy strategies, because there's a lot of those. People think, well, if I just have a drink, well, that'll take the edge off, or certainly drug use. And the problem with those things is they are short-lived. They are often, not effective with regard to long-term anxiety issues. And we always run the risk whenever we're using a substance to, get rid of a pain, a feeling. It doesn't always lead to the most healthy relationship with that substance. Too much social media, news coverage, video gaming, we know, and it's coming out in the news more and more. We know the omnipresent sort of overwhelming nature of social media and our inability to put our phones away, to get away from the news, the 24-hour news cycle. Those things absolutely contribute to our anxiety. Isolation, avoidance, diet, the foods we eat have certainly been well established to play roles in anxiety. Too much sugar, caffeine, processed foods, all those things we're not supposed to eat, whether we have kidney disease or not. And certainly when you have kidney disease, you're supposed to stay away from. And there's some comfort foods, and there are things in there that give us some, sense of relief from the challenges of each day, but they can absolutely contribute to the challenges of anxiety. And then the one I really want to talk about, and I'm really going to focus in on a little bit here, is the importance of putting ourselves first. And, for a lot of people, that's a foreign concept. I wrestled with that for years. I thought, gosh, if I put myself first, that must mean I'm being selfish, or I'm not paying attention to other people. I didn't even really understand what it meant. But what it really means, and the easiest analogy is, I'm sure most of you have been on an airplane, and they say if there's ever a loss of cabin pressure, whose mask do you put on first? Not your neighbor's, you put on yours. Because if you can't breathe, if you can't function, you can't help anybody else. And so when you have life with a chronic condition, such as, one as complicated as kidney disease, putting yourself first and really learning how to manage your needs is really an essential point in your quality of life, because you have so much that you're responsible for. So putting ourselves at the top is not selfish. It's about self-care. So there's two important things I want to talk about here. And I told you're going to hear me say this over and over. Life with chronic kidney disease requires all sorts of effort. Life with a mental health condition requires all sorts of effort. And I get it. We're tired. We're anxious. We're depressed. We don't feel good. We don't have energy. We don't have an appetite. And I understand and I respect the challenges associated with feeling that way. But I also know that more than anything, we have to prepare and practice, because anxiety comes out of nowhere. Depression looms and lives within us. And if we, just like I said earlier, if we, have a panic attack and are suddenly Googling how to breathe, that's not the best time to be doing this. The best time to do these things is when we feel relatively decent and we have that opportunity to prepare ourselves and practice these skills so that when we do have these challenges, we're ready to go. So one of the things I want to talk about this, I'm going to give you a quick primer on something I'm sure many of you who have ever been to therapy have heard about, something called cognitive behavior therapy. And why I love to use this, and I use this all the time in my work at Face It, is because it helps us understand the connections between our thoughts and our beliefs, our feelings, and the way that we act. And this is a powerful little diagram because up there at the top is this notion of our thoughts and beliefs and how these thoughts and these beliefs we might have about ourselves, how they impact our feelings and how they impact our behaviors. So think about automatic thoughts for just a moment. You generate upwards of 6,000 thoughts a day, and they are automatic, and they often don't make sense, and they come out of the blue. And a lot of them are negative, they're full of judgment, and they're irrational. And what they do is they distort reality. They contribute to feelings of anxiety, of hopelessness, fear, depression, etc. Particularly, when you think about, for example, anxious thinking. People with anxiety think things like, I can't handle this. What if I say or do the wrong thing and I look stupid? I am stupid. I'm incompetent. What if people stop caring about me or stop loving me? We generate these thoughts over and over and over. It's sort of this repetitive tape that plays in the back of our minds. Something horrible is going to happen. I just know it. And think about this. If we have upwards of 8,000 automatic thoughts a day, and by and large, they're of this nature, it's not really too surprising that it makes us feel bad. And then when we feel bad, we tend to avoid, we tend not to engage in healthy behaviors. So understanding these thoughts is really, really critical. How to do something about these things. And I actually am going to just, there we go. We want to understand what generates these thoughts. Where do they come from? And so if we can begin to pay attention to where and when we have these thoughts, pay attention to how we think and talk to ourselves, it's critical. We have a lot of thought distortions. People who deal with depression, people who deal with anxiety, yours truly included, we have thought distortions that are a big part of those automatic thoughts. We tend to personalize things. For example, your physician might be making rounds and skips by your chair and goes to the next chair, and you think, God, he doesn't like me. She doesn't care about me. See, I don't matter. I'm just another cog in this machine here. Well, maybe they had indicated that they needed to see this patient for a different patient for a reason. So we tend to personalize things. We tend to believe our feelings and thoughts are facts. That anxious feeling, that sense of dread that things aren't going to go well. We tend to fall for that, and we begin to believe that that is real. Anxiety is mostly built on false fears. And when we believe and buy into those false fears, well, then we continue to perpetuate the challenges of anxiety. We catastrophize. We have black and white thinking, which is kind of all or nothing thinking. We have a lot of perfectionism. A lot of people who deal with anxiety and depression are massive closeted perfectionists. I mean, if it isn't perfect, then it must belong in the trash, right? And that's not how life is. If I didn't do my diet perfectly, if I went over my fluid restrictions, and see, I'm a terribly non-adherent patient. You've probably heard that from people along the way, but it doesn't mean that that's how life should be. Perfectionism is not real attainable for most people. So understanding this triad is really important. I want to just walk you through it real quick with a couple of examples. So what we want to do is we want to learn to change our processes. And again, I wish I had 2 weeks to sit down and work with all of you on this. We have 40 minutes, but what we want to do is catch these thought processes. And this has to be purposeful. Remember, prepare and practice. It has to be very purposeful because we can't just think our way out of this. We have to work our way through this. So here's a thing you can do. And again, these slides will be up and available. You can get something called a thought diagram. So there's an event, there's a thought, there's a feeling, there's an action, and there's a result. And if we change the thought, we have the opportunity to change the entire trajectory, our feelings, our actions, our results. Let me walk you through an example. So let's say the event is you're invited to a party, some new friends. Well, what if you have the anxious thoughts? What if they don't like me? What if I'm the only person there with a facial and they stare at me? Well, if you lead with those thoughts, you're probably going to feel fear. You might feel shame. You might feel unwanted. And then your action is you don't go to the party. And then what happens? Isolation, no fun. You're perpetuating your negative feelings. So if you think about your reaction to these things, we have the opportunity to control how we react to this. So let's swing it around now that you've learned a little something about monitoring your thoughts. So here's a great event. You got invited to a party with a new friend. And you think, what if I meet someone nice? What if I meet somebody else with kidney disease? Boy, I might meet a friend who can help me better understand what I'm going through. We can connect. Well, now you might feel curiosity. Or in Lori and RSN's world, you might feel some hope. I mean, there might be some hope that floods your body rather than fears of abandonment and unwanted. You might actually get excited. Then you go to the party and you connect and you feel good about yourself. So you really can do, I'm going to go back here. You really can have a huge impact on the result. Remember, the thought, the feeling, the action, those are the three things that we really have some domain over. So what are we going to do with this? Well, when we have these automatic thoughts and they're negative, we can come up with other ways to look at our thoughts. We can try to come up with alternative thoughts. And I'll tell you right now, if you've suffered with depression or anxiety, there's always this little voice in your head when you come up with something positive that says, yeah, but that's not true. And that's not the way it is. There's always this little nagging thing. So this takes work and it feels awkward. But as you begin to generate alternative thoughts, you can find some value in thinking completely differently and changing beliefs about who you are. Get yourself some note cards. I'm a big note card guy. I don't know if anybody, I'm sure there's people here who have maybe done a type of therapy called DBT. And look at you, Cher, exactly. My wife laughs at me. She tells me we could probably go on some great vacation if I'd stop buying note cards. I live for note cards because we can put things on there and they can remind us of what we're doing, what we're trying to do. So buy yourself some note cards. And when you start to identify negative thoughts, and you come up with alternative thoughts, you got it on a note card. We have to examine evidence. Remember when I showed you a slide a few back where it said anxious thinking and negative thinking, we tend to believe that that's true, right? We believe that we don't belong. We believe that we don't have friends. We believe that people will laugh at us. What is the real evidence? Is it just our thought? Or have we actually had experiences where people treat us poorly? And sure, that may have happened to people along the way. But generally speaking, so much of this anxious thinking is built on falsehoods. So we need to learn to examine the evidence. What is the evidence for thought? Is there another way I could look at this situation? Remember, I said there could be a physician who you anticipated, they were at the chair to the right of you. And so when they skipped you over and went to the next chair, your assumption was, well, they don't like me. Well, what is the evidence for that? Maybe the evidence or the alternative thought is, yeah, this doctor had to see somebody else, or this doctor plans to come back and see me later when they have more time. Not just this immediate notion that I'm not liked. That's what this is about examining the evidence. Write it down. Write it down. Because again, the power of this thinking is so strong that until we can start getting it out of our own head, putting it on these note cards, creating a little document that says, okay, maybe I don't know exactly what's happening. It's really hard to do that just in your own head. So these coping cards, these are things that you can use. What are your coping skills? You know what? I'm going to get a card. I'm going to write on the top of it, coping skill for anxiety. I'm going to start examining my thoughts. I'm going to question the evidence. I'm going to work on alternative thoughts. And I'm going to think about these things. And I'm going to pull these cards out and I'm going to use them because they will give you lots of little reminders. And again, prepare and practice. I shouldn't have put those two words together, is critical. Distractions. Distractions are something that, you don't hear a lot about in the therapy world, but learning to distract ourselves can be very, very helpful. When we get stuck, I'm at my office, so I'm going to have my phone ring in the background. When we get stuck in this negative loop and we are unable to stop it, because remember, I'm sure most of you have experienced that really negative, powerful, repetitive, anxious thinking at 2:00 in the morning. I mean, It's horrible. You can't shut your brain off. You wake up, if you were dressed, you could go out to the store, you could do anything because you're so ramped up and you're so ready to go. If we can develop habits or tools to distract ourselves, and we're going to get into some of these things around mindfulness and breathing and exercising, and I would put your distractions on your coping cards. Pick up the phone, call a friend, go for a walk, touch your toes, splash some cold water on your face. These sorts of distractions are incredibly effective at times to help move us out of this repetitive thought process. I want to talk a little bit about something called a courage ladder, because anxiety is often built around our fear of we can't, we won't be able to, we won't be welcome. And so when we start to do things like using a courage ladder, and many of you have heard many different parts of what a courage ladder is, it helps us break down these challenges and makes them more manageable. So why do we use them? Well, break down a problem. I mean, when you get stuck in anxious thinking, and let's say, for example, the thought is around, I can't talk to my doctor. I simply can't. I'm afraid of them. They won't listen to me. They don't like me. They don't care about me. I just can't. Well, that is a massive, massive problem. And it's unmanageable. So what we're going to do, we're going to break it down. The thought is, I can't do this, right? So what do? You shut down. You don't do anything. And we don't feel good about ourselves when we don't take action. So let's break it down. Okay, the example, I can't talk to my doctor. Well, let's start with, I can talk to my doctor, but I'm afraid. I don't know what to say. Okay, well, who could you talk to first? Could you talk to a nurse? Could you talk to a social worker? Could you talk to a fellow patient? Who could you talk to? That's breaking things down. That's the first small step, is I could enlist somebody's help to help me move towards talking to my doctor. And so it starts with the easy parts, and it helps us as we move forward to feel more confident and have simple steps that we can manage. So you write down small goals, and as you have success, we generally do begin to feel better. We generally do find our courage, and we generally are able to begin to tackle things that seemed unmanageable. Now I'm going to talk about a big theory here, but it's a really, really important one. And I'm sure most of you have heard about it, and it's called mindfulness. And mindfulness, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or mindfulness-based therapy, it's a really critical component to learning to manage anxiety. At its root, mindfulness is about training ourselves to be in the present moment. Remember when I mentioned earlier the whole flight or fight sort of mechanism, and anxiety is built around flight. When you're stuck and anxious, your body is telling you that there's a lion chasing you down, and that thing is coming. And if I don't run, I better keep going. I'm in trouble. Well, there's no lion. You can't outrun it anyway, but you keep telling yourself this. You keep doing this over and over. What mindfulness does is it helps you realize there's actually not a lion. I'm sitting at my desk. It's about 65 degrees out. The sun is shining. I hear some cars in the background, and I'm perfectly safe. If I can pull my head, pull myself, pull my breath, pull my compassion into the moment, then suddenly the power of that anxiety is not nearly as strong. And this takes practice, but it's not complicated. It's things that you can do. Let's talk real quick about some basic components of mindfulness. First of all, it's purposeful. And one of the first things you can do, whether you're looking at stress or anxiety, is let's begin to look at this as a challenge. And I know this isn't true for everybody, but for a lot of people, if I believe I have no say over something, then I'm lost. But if the challenge is, oh, you mean there's something I can do? There's some component to this that I have a say over? Okay, I can do something with that. And mindfulness wants you to look at your challenges or your stress and these efforts as a challenge. You got to be engaged. It takes purposeful action, and it requires practice. There's that P word. So at its core, mindfulness is about learning to recognize what's going on moment by moment. And a critical component is without judgment. Because when we sit at, if we're sitting at our desk and we're at our desk and we're aware of the temperature and we can kind of feel the way we're breathing, and then we say, yeah, and you're still a loser. Well, that judgment part sort of defeats what we're trying to accomplish. And benevolence, which means learning to be kind to ourselves. And that's for a lot of us with anxious and depressive thinking, there's not a lot of kindness sometimes in that background voice that goes on and on. There's a lot of negative. There's a lot of abusing ourselves and a lot of, just unhealthy ways of treating and talking to ourselves. So breathing. I'm sure many of you have heard about breathing. I'm sure many of you practice breathing skills. I cannot stress enough how absolutely critical learning to breathe is for you. It will reduce pain. It will reduce anxiety. It will improve sleep. It will improve your focus. When we start to learn how to breathe, probably the most important thing that happens, we get adequate oxygen. I mentioned to you that I had experienced some panic attacks along the way. One of the first things that happens with panic attacks is shallow, rapid breathing. So what I do is I automatically begin to starve my brain for oxygen. Well, what does my brain do? My brain goes into flight mode. When we don't take in the oxygen we need, we amp up our stress levels from a physiologic standpoint. And of course, that's going to trigger thoughts in our head. And so learning how to breathe, and there's many resources for breathing exercises that you can find. And again, I'm not able to go through all of these with you, but things simple, just learning to breathe in through your nose. Really purposeful. You do that and you practice that, what you'll find is that over time, you'll begin to breathe that way without even practicing it. And it really is calming and it's relaxing. And there's lots of different techniques. And again, we've got access to Google, you've got access to YouTube, you have all the resources you need at your disposal to find good breathing techniques. And the wonders of it, again, back in 2002, when things were really tough for me and I found myself in the hospital, one of the first techniques that I started to master as I got out of the hospital was to learn how to breathe. And of course I have stress in my life. There's no question. Everybody's life has stress, but my reaction to stress, my reaction to when I feel so anxious has dramatically improved as I've worked on improving my breathing. I mentioned this earlier. We need to learn to have a little compassion for ourselves. And for any of you who ever have done any of this work around monitoring your thoughts or the way that you talk to yourself, we can be pretty tough on ourselves and we can be pretty hard on ourselves. And learning self-compassion is a critical component of mindfulness because, again, you interact on a regular basis with healthcare providers and they have a whole different level of expectation for how you should manage this disease. And don't hear me say you shouldn't take your meds or manage your diet, but do hear me say you're human. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we don't do it perfectly. And if your immediate reaction is to berate yourself and tell yourself you're a terrible patient and they must be right, I'm so non-adherent, it's not healthy and it's not good for us. So learning to care for ourselves is a critical component here. Part of this is being aware of our struggles. You think about this again, you start monitoring some of your thoughts, you're going to be surprised how harsh you speak to yourself. And you would find that you probably wouldn't even talk to your worst enemy this way, but yet you have some of this repetitive, automatic 6,000-7,000 thoughts taking place every day, and they're not compassionate thoughts. That's a problem. So, like I said, prepare, practice, change our thoughts, take action, research mindfulness, the breathing component, the compassion, the acceptance of, the challenges we face. These things are all just so important and they will help. They will help. I could put on my academic hat and cite all sorts of really robust studies that show the impact of mindfulness on the reduction of anxiety. It's real and it's very, very helpful. Takes work, takes practice, takes some research. But there are people in your clinic who can help you. There are people in the outpatient clinics who can help you. You have my name now. You have my email. You have my office phone number. I am always happy to have conversations with people. I started working with folks who had kidney disease way, way, way back. And I've always just so enjoyed this opportunity because I know what a challenge your life looks like. And it's very rewarding as a professional to give people the tools they need to better manage their lives. And I think that's what this is also, so important. So I snuck it all in by 4:15. I probably talked super fast, but I wanted to stay on track and happily I'll leave it to Cher or Isla if there's time for questions.
You did it.
Hey,
Fantastic.
I've done this a few
you
times.
were great. And, I myself have struggled with anxiety due to chronic pain, not during the day, because during the day, like you said, I can distract myself. It's whenever I go and lay down, whenever you can't hear anything and you've turned off every light source inside of your house. And then I build up the anxiety of, will I be able to go to sleep? So I understand what you're saying. And sometimes it's a little note card you need, and sometimes you need the big one.
The whole legal pad.
Or a legal pad.
People who have dealt with anxiety understand that fear of going to bed, because when it gets quiet and when the thought processes click on and they're not good thought processes, that's what I'll come back to with all the prepare and practice piece of this, because eventually we have to go to bed at night. Eventually we are alone with our thoughts. Eventually we are left to face these demons, and there are things we can do. And there are effective tools. They're not always easy to master, but that's why we call it practice.
I want to thank you for sharing the Renal Support Network support groups, because I know that peer support for me has helped tremendously, especially dealing with those kidney issues, dialysis. It wasn't around for me whenever I was on dialysis, but after my transplant, it's really made such a big difference. And breathing, we also offer our exercise classes, and both Adina and Nicole are wonderful about teaching you controlled breathing, and it's something I really never mastered before. I think it's made a big difference. I would like to ask you one question, and
Sure.
That is, if someone is having a huge problem, more than the legal pad, right? And they're looking for professional help. And what is it that we can do to protect ourselves, to get reliable information? What credentials does the person need to have after their name? Meaning, how many letters, or who do we go to? Obviously, we now have your contact information. That's a good one. That's a reliable one. But do we start with our medical professional?
It's a complicated question. There's lots of different avenues people take to become therapists, to be counselors. There's licensed psychologists, there's licensed social workers, there's licensed marriage and family therapists, there's many different paths. And I don't believe that the letters necessarily equate to the skill level. But I would say, I think really understanding evidence-based therapy is really important. And
Sure.
And what do we know? A lot of people go to therapy and they say, gosh, I just talk and talk and talk and nothing comes out of it. Well, that's probably quite possible, because just talking. I mean, you and I could just talk and talk. Therapists should be giving you homework. Therapists should be helping you establish goals. Therapists should be working with you to gain new skills. We do a program here at Face It where we pair peer support with a therapy program, and we use a particular therapist. And this particular therapist mantra is, if I can't help you in 6 sessions, I must not be very good at what I do. And that's another complicated conversation. But, therapy that goes on for years and years and years, I honestly, as somebody who's been in this field for a number of years, I really question that. Because if I can't give you some basic breathing skills, if I can't teach you some basic, coping skills around managing your thoughts, writing down, journaling, then I'm not giving you what you need. And so I think what's really important, and I think what's really important for the people on this call, particularly people with any chronic condition, is understanding trauma-based work, things like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Some of you may have heard about it. It's the moving your, those are very, and art, something called accelerated resolution therapy. Some of these therapies are very helpful with reducing the impact of the feelings of the anxiety. And then you have a better chance to deal with the irrational thoughts. I'm sure for most of you, if you've ever done therapy, gosh, this is irrational, but I still feel so anxious. And then that anxiety feeling is what takes over. So a therapist ought to be able to work with you to help reduce the impact of the emotions you're feeling. And that often doesn't come through just talking. Those are skills. And so when you're looking for a therapist, I think it's really important to understand people's experience. I think it's really important to understand what people are trained to do. It'd be a great article for an RSN letter or a newsletter about what are the type of therapies. And I know a guy who'd be more than happy to write that article. So, so people knew what are we looking for here? Because just talking, there can be value in that. But for people who deal with trauma, if all we do is talk, we maybe tend to re-traumatize people more than anything.
Maybe. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your contact information as well. I'll call you Sunday. Kidding.
Yeah, sounds good.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing your information, your wisdom. You rock. And it was great to see you again. Thank you very much. And we'll catch you next time then.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
And a shout out to our corporate mission partners for making this happen.